Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're doing Stalker 2 on Arc GPU. Welcome to Response PC, I'm Dunk, let's game on. Starting off on the A310, the i5-12600K and 32GB of RAM, we're having a disastrous start. At 1080p, low settings, XeSS balance, we get an average of 22 FPS. GPU is obviously pegged at 100%, using 6.6GB of VRAM out of 4. This is a 4GB VRAM card. That means we're going to use 24.2GB of RAM. This is a big no, but obviously it is, because the proposed minimum requirement is the GTX 1060 at 6GB VRAM, or the RX 580 or A750 at 8GB of VRAM. I wasn't expecting too much about the A310. Even if you drop the resolution to 720p, not upscaling, literally 720p, we still have a hard time to stay in the 20 FPS. Jumping to the next Arc GPU, the A380, which has 6GB of VRAM, was giving nothing better. We gain 1 FPS for an average of 23 FPS with XeSS balance at 1080p. So let's enable frame gen just for the fun of it, and we get an average of 38 FPS. In the mid 40 if you are in the open world, and in the low 30s when you're in the city. And with the frame gen, we have the GPU pegged at 100% using 6.8GB of VRAM out of 6. CPU is barely doing anything in the mid 50s, but we're using 23.1GB of system memory. The RAM is really high. This game is hungry for memory. Now is the turn of one of my favorite Arc GPU, the A580. This is the 8GB VRAM card and can run the game at medium settings, XeSS balance 1080p without frame gen for an average of 50 FPS. You're going to be about 40 FPS in the city and just under 60 in the open world. GPU peg at 100% using 6.1GB of VRAM, so we're far from our 8GB. CPU is in the low 40% of utilization, and we're using just about 20GB of system memory, making my point of the 16GB of proposed minimum requirement of memory is too low, should be 24. Otherwise than that, the A580 run the game smoothly. The frame time is quite straight, making the game quite enjoyable. I didn't encounter any stutter or crash. Now is the turn of the A750. I have the Elden Ring edition, which should be the proposed minimum requirement, like the minimum requirement will have been that card from the dev. But right now, as you can see, I'm playing at high settings with XeSS quality. We're quite far from the low settings with XeSS balance. And if you remember my video of the proposed minimum requirement, the A750 was doing quite well at low settings with XeSS balance. But removing the CPU bottleneck and the system memory bottleneck, now the GPU is performing well, because remember it was at 72% utilization. Now we're at 99, using 8.4GB of VRAM out of 8. Mean we're using some of the system memory to compensate, which is currently using 21.8GB of system memory out of 32, making my point even more that 16 is not enough. So what's the FPS? We get an average of 41, having a 54 average FPS in the open world and just 31 FPS in the city. Sometimes dipping in the 28-29 FPS in the city, but nothing to be concerned about, since the frame time is smooth. And don't forget, you can always adjust the settings to your liking. And lastly, we have the A770 LE. We are still at 1080p, but now we are at epic settings with XeSS quality. That gives us the exact FPS from the A750 at high. We are at 41. When in the city, you are at 33 FPS average, and when you are in the wild, you are at 49 FPS. With the GPU peg at 98-99% of utilization, we are using up to 9.1GB of VRAM. CPU-wise, we are in the low 30s, and for the memory, system memory, we are at 23GB out of 32. You definitely can drop the settings to play at higher FPS, or even drop maybe to medium to play at 1440p, but that's what I was testing right now, 1080p. And before someone asks, yes, I have the latest driver of Intel Arc GPU, which include Stalker 2. So with this video, we figure out that the A580 should be the minimum requirement to play Stalker 2, not the A750. Also, 16GB is not enough. My guess it should be 24, 2 times 8 and 2 times 4. And from the result that we see right now, the A770 won't cut it to be in the recommended requirement, as we need to reach 60 FPS at 1440p at high settings, which we don't reach even at high settings at 1080p. And that's all I had to say on the ARC GPU on Stalker 2. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one, and subscribe.